Hopkins and Stern, men with no credentials, now offer their skills to the good people of Suffolk. The Puritan tradition is even stronger here than it is in Essex, and village after village gives them welcome.
Satan is abroad in England in this period. It is he who is in the king's councils. It is he who is creating the war. But he's also perhaps available in our village. He's creating breakdown and tensions there. It's this that Stern and Hopkins can play on. The sense that we, as the villagers of Framlingham or the townsfolk of Aldborough, can actually do something.
As they scour Suffolk, they refine their methods for extracting confessions. They're still constrained by the law. Torture is not permitted, and Hopkins is careful how he describes his techniques.
It has been accused that besides unreasonable watching, suspects were extraordinarily walked till their feet were blistered, and so forced through cruelty to confess. Certainly when they did lie down, then the watchers did desire them to sit up and walk about, but never, or seldom, did any witch complain. The purpose of the walking at its worst was only to keep them awake, so they would call their familiars into open view to help them.
Now, whether Hopkins knew that he could get a confession by walking these people and depriving them of sleep, or whether he genuinely believed that he was the familiars would come, is a question that we don't have the answer to. I think he knew what he was doing, and this was his way of getting the confession.
In many of the villages that they visit, local Puritan ministers help marshal the accusations of their parishioners and deliver suspects for interrogation.
As they rode into villages through East Anglia, they were presented with a rather clear socially profiled group. These would be old people, poor people, largely women. They would be people who had distinctive local reputations as odd, as strangely behaving. Hopkins and Stern, confronted with this pattern, poor, old, women, would say, but such people are vulnerable to Satan's temptation. What we can say is they were deeply vulnerable to the investigative techniques of Hopkins and Stern.
Hopkins and Stern have little trouble finding candidates among the downtrodden and dispossessed.
Susan Steggold of Hintlesham confessed that after her marriage to her husband, the devil came to her. Her husband, being a bad husband to her, she wished he might depart, that is to say, he should die. Shortly afterwards, he died. Then she cried out, "Oh, my dear husband," and being asked whether she bewitched him dead or no, she said she wished him ill, and that whatever she wishes comes to pass.
Following 3 days and nights watching, Priscilla Collett of Dunwich confessed after an hour's sleep. About 12 years ago, the devil had tempted her while she was in a sickness to do away with her children, else she would always have been poor. She laid one of her children close to the fire to burn it and went again to bed. The fire burnt the hair and head, and she heard it cry, but she did not have the power to help. One other of her children pulled it away. The next time the devil came to her, he demanded she seal a covenant.
John Bisek of Wallingfield Magna confessed to me that his familiars came in the likeness of snails. He often arose out of bed, made a fire, and lay down by it to let them suck his blood. His wife said he used to tell her he was sick, but his pain was eased by this means. To clear all suspicion that might fall on her, she was searched and found clear. The accused confessed that he had followed this practice for 20 years.
Hopkins and Stern decide to work apart in order to cover the ground more effectively. Stern takes the western end of the county, while Hopkins concentrates on the area nearer the Suffolk coast. By now, dozens of suspects are filling Suffolk's small jails. It is a measure of Hopkins' confidence that he now turns his attention to a more ambitious target. The combination of theology and theatre have a powerful impact. The Reverend John Lowes, vicar of Brandeston, is deeply unpopular. He has been involved in legal disputes with his parishioners, held controversial religious views, and once even protected an accused witch. Now the community exacts revenge. Their treatment of John Lowes makes no concessions to his considerable age or social position.
I have heard it from them that watched with him, that they kept him awake several nights together, and ran him backwards and forwards until he was out of breath. Then they rested him a little, and then ran him again, and this they did till he was weary of his life, and scarce sensible of what he said or did. Then they did swim him.
King James, in his Demonology, has said that it is a certain rule that witches deny their baptism when they covenant with the devil. When they undergo trial by water and they are thrown into it, the waters refuseth to receive them into their bosom, and they float.
People have a preconception about the swimming of witches, whereby if you sank, you were innocent and drowned, and if you floated, you were guilty and were hanged, so there was no way out. But in fact, it is a test whereby witches would supposedly float in the water if the water rejected them, as a kind of an inversion of Christian baptism, and that if witches sank, they were attached to a rope and they would be hauled out of the water.
I personally think it was almost a communal way, the way a community could justify the fact that this person was indeed a witch. Hopkins could go through all his legal rigmarole, if you want, but people could actually see for themselves that this person that they were accusing was indeed a witch, and presumably get some comfort from that.
The Reverend John Lowes fails the test and confesses soon after the swimming.
Mr. Lowes, parson of Brandeston, confessed that he bewitched a ship near Harwich, so that with the extreme tempestuous seas, the said ship was swallowed up by merciless waves. Further, he confessed that he had done other most heinous, wicked, and accursed acts by the help of 6 familiars. This Mr. Lowes had a teat on the crown of his head. There is none that maketh a covenant with the devil, but has from him a private mark.
is now 4 months since the first arrests were made, and the Essex accused are finally brought to trial in Chelmsford. Because of the disruption to central authority caused by the war, the court is headed by a soldier, Robert, Earl of Warwick. He is a prominent Puritan. For 28 of the 36, the sentence is the statutory penalty for witchcraft. But for the other 8, the evidence is found unsatisfactory, and they are acquitted. Only now, for the first time, there is a measure of opposition to the witch hunt. It enables one of those convicted to escape the noose. Stern is outraged.
Who are they that have been against the prosecutions? They are allied with the enemies of God. I dare not list them, not only for fear of offence, but for fear of suits of law. I saw one man in Colchester labour all he could to keep a woman from her legal trial, and I heard him threaten both me and all who had given evidence against her. Yea, she was condemned, but by his procurement she was reprieved.
It is the end of August 1645. Now in Suffolk begins the largest witchcraft trial ever seen in England. Nearly 200 prisoners stand charged. Hopkins and Stern, who have overseen many of the arrests, are summoned to testify. One chronicler records,
"A very great number of persons have been apprehended of the damnable and diabolical sin of witchcraft, and divers of them have confessed themselves guilty thereof. A commission has been granted for the trial, but it is charged that a most special care should be taken, both in the execution of the law and also that all tenderness might be used in a matter wherein the lives and immortal souls of so many are concerned."
The Parliamentary Commission puts a stop to the use of sleep deprivation and the swimming test. But this is only to ensure that correct procedures are followed. The prosecution of witches continues unabated. The convictions start to flow, and the killings continue. Stern, however, is irritated by the way the first batch of those condemned, including the Reverend John Lowes, failed to go with due repentance.
There were 18 to be executed. Most of them were kept together in a barn, where they made a covenant amongst themselves not to confess a word when they were hanged next day at the gallows, notwithstanding that they had formerly confessed. They died next day very desperately.
In the late summer of 1645, we're entering the most intense phase of the East Anglian witch hunts. Now we have to put this into a bit of perspective. Typically, English witchcraft prosecutions happen one a year, one every other year, a very low rate of prosecution. What we've got here is something quite unique. Dozens and dozens of people who are being tried and executed.
Some of the accused never make it to court. Conditions in the prisons are notoriously bad, and many are dying of so-called jail fever. Others, it seems, may have committed suicide, and at least one simply escapes.
It it is ordered that all constables make diligent search for the said James Moore, and to seize his body and convey it safely to the said jail.
The Suffolk witch trials are prosecuted throughout the autumn. It is one of the grimmest episodes in English judicial history. It is reported in a London publication.
The moderate intelligencer, impartially communicating martial affairs to the Kingdom of England, September 4th, 1645. Religious men say devils are wiser than men. But why then is it that devils should choose to be conversant with silly women? If the devil be so wise, why should he not choose to deal with wise men? Yet, as appears by the news we received this day from Suffolk, he meddles with none but poor old women. Life is precious, and there is need of great inquisition before it is taken away.
But this is a rare voice of opposition, and it falls on deaf ears. Even children are convicted and condemned. Stern writes of one whose mother had already been hanged.
A boy from Rattlesden was accused when he was under 9 years of age. He voluntarily confessed that he suckled a familiar and had it at his command to do mischief. This boy being young, I suppose the jury had hopes of his improvement. As I confess, I also had, and he was released. But he was after some time suspected again, and was put into prison. There he voluntarily confessed how after his mother was hanged, he had renewed his covenant with the devil. He confessed that the devil appeared to him in the likeness of a black-brown mare, which would carry him whither he desired.
Inspired by so many successful prosecutions, Hopkins and Stern redouble their efforts. They extend their campaign into neighbouring counties, Norfolk, Cambridgeshire, and Huntingdonshire. Their ambition is boundless.
They are professional men. They can find witches better than anybody has ever found witches before. And this is a public service that they're engaged in. They will offer that service to the totality of society, purging the land of witches.
It is not simply religious zeal that drives them on. There are other, more worldly interests. Hopkins and Stern, now famous witch hunters, find that they can do God's work and prosper by it.
It is agreed that the gentleman, Mr. Hopkins, being employed in the country for discovering witches, be sent for to come to Great Yarmouth, and that he shall have his fee and allowances for his pains, as he hath in other places.
It is stated that all that this witch-finder does is fleece the country of money. But judge how I fleeceth the country. This witch-finder demands but £1 a town, and this is the great sum he takes to maintain him and his company.
But Hopkins is lying. It is a matter of record that in Aldborough he is paid £2. He later makes a second trip to the town and receives a further £2. And when he once again returns to give evidence the following year, he receives a final payment of £2. Witch hunting is proving to be a lucrative business. Hopkins and Stern were not the only ones to profit by it.
Paid to 6 men to stand guard at court and at the execution for 2.5 days at 12p a day and 6p for drink. All in, 15 shillings and 6p.
About 30 years ago, I've been much troubled in my mind. There appeared unto me the devil in the likeness of a great dog.
Paid to Henry Lawrence, the roper, for 7 halters and for making the knots. 8 shillings.
I heard the voice of my children who had died calling to me. Mother, mother, give me your soul and I will save the life of your child which is now living.
Paid to John Payne for hanging 7 witches. 11 shillings.
15 years ago, William Foster wanted to hang 2 of my children for stealing a scrap of bread, so I cursed him. And he fell sick and died.
For a post to set by the grave of the dead bodies that were hanged, and for burying them. 6 shillings.
It is now 18 months since the first cases in Manningtree, Essex. Over 150 men and women have been hanged, and Hopkins' reputation goes before him. When he arrives in King's Lynn in September 1646, he is heralded by an official drummer. The presence of the witch hunters strikes dread into the hearts of any who fall under suspicion.
Sometimes there be a blue spot where they have cut the teats away so they cannot be found. Sometimes the flesh is hollow when they pull them out with their nails, because they do not want to be found out.
Surprisingly, even in this atmosphere of intimidation, individuals are prepared to stand up to the witch-finders. John Gall of Great Staughton preaches openly against the witch-finders' methods.
The country people talk more passionately of the infallible and wonderful power of the witch-finders than they do of God. Every accident of nature is attributed as an effect of witchcraft. For this a witch must be sought out, and a witch-searcher summoned. Yet this searcher's profitable skill and experience is not much improved above the ordinary person.
This provokes a menacing letter from Hopkins to the authorities at Great Staughton. Hopkins is at the peak of his power.
I have this day received a letter to come to your town to search for evil persons called witches. But I hear your minister is against us. I now intend to come the sooner to hear his singular judgment. I was going to Kimbolton this week, but it shall be 10 to 1 that I shall come to your town first. I had known a minister in Suffolk preach as much against us, and he was forced to recant. I much marvel that witches have any who aid them. I would certainly like to know whether your town affords many sticklers, or is willing to give us good welcome and entertainment.
People are turning against Hopkins, unease at his campaign spreads. While he is busy stalking the countryside, formal complaints are brought against him in a Norfolk court case, probably by an ally of one of the accused. On hearing the news, Hopkins is forced to justify his actions in print. He dismisses his critics as ignorant.
Certain questions answered which have been accused against this witch-finder, Matthew Hopkins. Query 1. That he has to be the greatest witch himself, or else how could he have done all this? Answer. Satan's kingdom could not stand if it were divided against itself. Query 2. He must then have met with the devil and cheated him of his book, in which all the witches' names in England are written, and so had help from the devil. Answer. If he had been too tricky for the devil, it would be to his great commendation and no disgrace. Query 3. From where then does his skill proceed? Answer. Not from reading learned authors, but from experience.
Hopkins entitles his grandiose work The Discovery of Witches, and awards himself the imposing title Witch-Finder General. He and Stern, unswerving in their conviction, press forward in their cause.
It's almost a vindication of himself to say, yes, look, these are the questions you've asked me, these are the answers, shut up, go away, I'm getting on with it. And nobody seems to have challenged that. I think possibly if somebody was strong enough and stood up to him, they could have got him on one or two legal points, but they didn't. And he moves on, and Stern moves on, and they continue to hunt and discover witches.
I, Robert Ellis, to testify before the Justice of Peace for the Isle of Ely that the 4 cheats found upon my body to come by reason of a great labour that I did take in my youth. And I further say that I will not confess myself a witch, though you pull me to pieces with wild horses.
Without warning, Hopkins' activities come to an abrupt halt. Word spreads that the Witchfinder General has been attacked, that a mob has turned on Hopkins and subjected him to his own harsh test, that they have swum him.
Some gentlemen, out of indignation at the barbarity, took Hopkins and swam him, as the others had been. That cleared the country of him, and it was a great deal of pity that they did not think of the experiment sooner.
But if we are to believe Stern's account, the truth is more prosaic. The rumors are no more than the wishful thinking of villagers troubled by their own complicity. Matthew Hopkins dies of consumption in 1647. He was never called to account for the deaths of so many innocent people. Stern himself, after giving evidence at a few last cases, returns to his family in Essex. A year later, he publishes his own account of the affair, in which he pays tribute to Hopkins, answers criticisms, and offers advice to any who wish to follow in their footsteps as witch-finders.
Since the 25th of March, 1645, we have been agents in the discovering of about 200 witches. What has been done for the common good, These witches were justly and deservedly executed following legal trials. I leave myself to the censure of the world, yet desire that it might be left to the Almighty, who knoweth the secret of all hearts. Blessed are they that do his commandments. Revelations 22:14.
You'll find more about the secret history featured in this programme at channel4.com/history, and we'll have details about next week's programme here on 4 in just a sec. Next up, it's the morning after the night before. Jade and Adele are still volatile after the row, and the new boy Tim talks himself into trouble with Big Brother.